Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Lynn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning, and welcome to Ethical Perspectives on the News. My name is Scott Samuelson, and I'm a professor of philosophy at Kirkwood Community College on the Iowa City campus. There have been over 70 bomb threats at 53 Jewish community centers in the U.S. and Canada so far this year. Just last month, hundreds of Jewish grave sites in St. Louis were vandalized. This year, anti-Semitic hate crimes are up 94% in New York City. Law enforcement and civil rights activists see these threats as part of a spike in hate crimes across the country, including threats and threatening letters to Muslims and Jews here in Iowa. I think it's important to recognize that something changed in this country after the election. The editor of the Southern Poverty Law Center's Hate Watch blog has said, "This, without a doubt, is a new development." President Trump has responded to questions about his election's connection to the rise in hate crimes by saying that he's the least anti-Semitic, least racist person ever. What's the cause of this rise in hate crimes? How should our leaders respond? How should we as citizens confront the rising tide of hate mongering? We have a great panel today to discuss these questions. Right next to me is Jeff Portman, rabbi at Agudas Achim congregation in Iowa City. Thanks for being on.
My pleasure.
Hassan Selim, imam at the Islamic Center of Cedar Rapids. Hassan, thanks for being on.
Thank you.
And at the end, Charles Crowley, the president of the Interreligious Council of Lynn County and an active member of Christ Episcopal Church in Cedar Rapids. Charles, thank you for being on.
Thank you for having me.
Well, maybe, Charles, we can start with you. So why do you think there's been a rise in hate crimes?
Well, I hate to kind of lead off on this, but I think it starts from the top. I think in the last election, we saw the rules of civility really drop. And I watched the Republican debates, and I was just astonished that then candidate Trump could get away with the sort of name-calling and belittling and really lack of rational argument with the other candidates. And I think that really lowered the level of civility that you kind of see. And I think it gave people the freedom to do some things that maybe they didn't feel like they could do before. And also, I think it's a reaction against President Obama, 8 years of his presidency. And for the people who did not like that, this gives them a chance to react to that.
Yeah. Well, and Hassan, I want to ask you the same question. I mean, why do you think that people are so on edge and so willing to express the kind of venom that we've seen and engage in these kind of terrible acts of hate against fellow Americans?
Well, I would join Charles in saying that it has to do with civility and not being able to have a civil discourse. And when it is something that people witness on the highest level of debates concerning the highest office in the country, I think it have a trickle-down kind of effect where other people find it very permissible to use not just the language, but to move into actions and commit acts of heinous crimes of hate towards the Jewish community, the Muslim community, other minorities as well. And so I think it's unfortunate that it begins from people who are supposedly should be not just political leaders, but also moral leaders for next generations of this in this country.
Right. So a kind of failure of leadership in the moral quality. Well, Jeff, I need to get you on this as well. I mean, so why do you think there's been a rise in hate crimes, and why does this rise seem to affect Jews disproportionately, at least in some places?
I agree with both the other speakers. I think since the presidential campaign started, people saw in President Trump and his surrogates a freedom which they didn't have before. Before the election, I think people were sort of under the rock, and that's where they should have been. That's where they should have stayed. And I think the rhetoric emanating from the Trump campaign gave people an excuse to show their true colors, which they were embarrassed to do so before. And so what they do is they take communities which they want to see marginalized, and that's the Jewish community and the Muslim community.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that the Muslims and Jews are the ones that are picked out. These are two groups which in the past have had strong links before, strong ties, and now I think with the current spate, the anti-Muslim acts, and anti-Semitic acts, the two communities are finding a closer ties now.
Yeah. Well, so you've all identified a kind of breakdown at the level of leadership that it seems as if somehow there's an example that's been set or a lack of an example that's been set, and that's unleashed some of this. But I wonder, I mean, if there's not other things involved as well. So in one sense we think, okay, maybe someone like a President Trump in some of his rough rhetoric has given people license to be to express things that they wouldn't otherwise express, but perhaps President Trump's coarse rhetoric is also a symptom of things that are happening in society. Is there a kind of social fraying going on where people feel more combative against other people, feel more like they're retreating to their own identity groups and willing to challenge those that they see as threatening that or see as other to them in some ways?
I think that's definitely the case, because if, for example, if we take the latest example of hate crime, the letter that was sent to the Islamic Center in Des Moines, where the language used specifically expresses the idea of others versus us, the true Americans, real Americans versus those who do not belong in here. And this is, people are frustrated for multiple of reasons. Maybe economy that is kind of lacking, or other issues that people are suffering from. And the candidates did not really have real solutions and answers to the people, and therefore I believe that picking certain groups, whether religious or otherwise, to use as scapegoats so that they don't have to be responsible and don't have to give real answers to the people who are voting for them.
Yeah.
So that's.
Yeah, Charles, I know that you actually have the letter. Mm-hmm. Did you want to say anything about it, or?
Well, the odd thing is it's the grouping of Muslims and Jews together here, and referring to President Trump, it says he's going to start with you Muslims. He's going to do to you Muslims what Hitler did to the Jews. So the writer, he, she, whoever, is kind of lumping these groups together. And but one thing I think we ought to notice here is that this is not just an American phenomenon. Mm-hmm. It's worldwide.
Yeah.
Europe is wrestling with the same problem. And probably, we haven't talked about immigration, but that's probably a factor that's in it, and people aren't happy with our lack of immigration control.
Yeah. Well, but I guess I'm concerned in a very deep way about this. I mean, it's certainly concerning wherever it appears, but I guess maybe it's my own foolish patriotism, but I wanted to believe that the United States has such a strong tradition of religious freedom that even though we've never been perfect and there have always been ways in which we've failed to live up to our ideals, that we stood for that in an important way, and that made us a kind of shining example, and it meant that these kinds of forces that led to the darkness of Nazism would not rise here. Do we need to be concerned that these forces are potential here in the United States?
Oh, very much so. I think we do, and I think part of it's reaction against Obama being a black president. Many people rebelling against that. He spoke for a very dark future of the United States. He painted the past.
You're talking about Trump, President Trump.
President Trump painted a very bleak future, mm-hmm. and people who may be disadvantaged of employment, lower wages, see him as, I guess, as a modern day leader who can take him out of that. And if if being anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim feeds into that, they're going to do that because they feel that those two groups might be part of the responsibility of why they are where they are now.
And this is what Hassan's describing as scapegoating in some ways. Yeah. Right. Is anti-Semitism in particular, do you think, a big problem here, or is it just this sort of lumped thing of, well, anyone who seems not like me is the problem?
I think it's specifically anti-Semitism and anti-Islam.
Yeah.
The two groups are being specifically attacked.
Right.
And it may not be too much longer where we see Hispanics being specifically attacked.
Right.
And as long as President Trump and others don't speak out forcefully against that, it's going to continue.
Mm-hmm. And what about, I mean, Christians, Charles? I mean, don't Christians have a special responsibility here if Jews and Muslims are bearing the brunt of this kind of
Well, we have
racism?
2,000 years of anti-Semitism, and it's a long and horrible and ignoble history. And sometimes when I read what I read, it's just a miracle that Jews have survived. And the Christians have a special responsibility because it's kind of, when Christianity was developed, it was developed against Judaism. And when Christians hear their scriptures read, they're going to hear some anti-Semitic diatribes in there. And it's specifically the responsibility of Christian preachers who preach on these topics to distinguish what was going on then versus what we know now. Jesus was Jewish. He was an observant Jew. He had disagreements with the Judaism of his day, but I think that when we continually hear these scriptures that are anti-Semitic, I think it's easy to fall into the anti-Semitism. I think 2,000 years of anti-Semitism just paved the way for the Nazis to do what they did, and the world kind of watched as it happened.
Right. So so this raises to me a kind of even more broader question about religion. I mean, you are all strong practicing members of faith communities. Does religion drive us more apart, or does it bind us together in some ways? I guess it does both, but I mean, what can we do to have religion be the best force that it can be for good in people's lives and not become, Christians are opposed to the Jews or opposed to the Muslims, or the Jews and the Muslims are mortal enemies? What can happen so that religion isn't just simply a way of dividing and conquering?
I think each faith group has its marginal extremist elements, and they're not the best part of that religion. Jews have it, Muslims do it, Christians have it, and I think each faith has to continue to try to marginalize those people, that they don't get a foot in the door and try to gather more adherents to what they believe. I think the best parts of religion are very good, each religion, but the worst parts of it can really do damage unless they're contained and put on the sidelines.
Yeah, Hassan, what
I
do you
believe
think
that
about this?
religion is just a tool that people can use either to come together as one community, to find the goodness in each other's, to try to aspire for a better future, or people can use it to just turn against one another and kill one another. We see examples of, if I speak of my own faith tradition, Islam, we have people in the Middle East now using the same scripture that I use personally to preach love, to preach unity between people of different religions, and they use the same scripture, and they perhaps understand it in a very extreme way as to kill other people who disagree with them, including Muslims themselves. And in fact, they start with Muslims first, and then they go to people of other faiths and religions. So it's really a tool that reflects what we make of it. We can use it to be a force of goodness, creating goodness and enhancing it and embracing it, or it can be a tool that can drive people to write such hateful things to their fellow citizens.
Well, and Charles, I need to ask you, as part of the important part of the Interreligious Council, I mean, what kinds of practical things can people of faith do to show some kind of unity in the face of this kind of hate?
Sure. Well, I'll just tell you one thing that we're doing. The Interreligious Council is taking out an ad in this Sunday's Gazette, and Rabbi Thalbaum did a great job of kind of highlighting what's going on now and how the different faith communities can come together and be stronger together to face some of these challenges. So I really think it's our duty as religious people to learn about other religions. I think the religious literacy in the United States is terrible, and I include myself in that. There's much more I need to know about Islam and Judaism and the other traditions, and we really need to get out of ourselves at this point. And the ironic thing about that is that when you start to learn about another faith tradition, you actually learn more about your own.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have found that to be true generally about learning about other traditions. It sort of enlivens you even to the resources within your own tradition in some strange way. Well, I want to explore kind of some of the political dimensions of this that some of you have already brought up, and we've talked about the leaders have some role here in setting an example and setting the tone of discourse that we have. But what are, do you think, some of the other political causes of this? Charles, you've talked about immigration. So people feel what? That immigrants threaten their livelihoods in some ways, threaten their identity. What can be done at the political level to remedy the kinds of ill will that people have about the immigration issue?
I believe one issue is, before going to immigration, is in fact education and raising awareness. We have seen research that people can find quite easily and read that immigration in many cases enhance the economy, and it's a good thing for countries to accept immigrants. We can also look at a very close example in Canada, where they have been accepting a big number of immigration. And it's a humanitarian issue that nations should stand to support, other human beings who might be suffering. Maybe now it's another nation, tomorrow it might be our nation, and others will have to rush into helping us. So that's one issue. The other is raising the awareness among the people, and that's where the politicians really need to realize their impact. When a word from them in a rally or on Twitter, which is becoming now the trend, can really change people's minds. And we're talking about thousands, if not millions of people who will read, might not be able to access a report about how immigration will enhance the economy, but they will be able to read a 140 character or letters tweet, and they will act upon this
right, and I think what you're saying is quite powerful, but I take it that a lot of people feel that their identity is threatened somehow. I mean, we've talked about how this is not just a problem in the United States, but it's an issue in England, for instance, and perhaps related to the Brexit vote. It's an issue throughout Europe where people feel as if somehow their identity in their nation is under siege from the kind of mass movements of peoples and money and information, that they've lost some kind of integrity of their identity. And I take it most people aren't going to respond by engaging in hate crimes to that, but there's always going to be some people on the margins who, when pushed in that way, are going to respond in that fashion. So, I mean, I guess I'm just wondering, on the one hand, there's the issue of educating people to know something about immigrants and about the positive sides of immigration, but is there some balance that we need to strike here about how we maintain some kind of identity as, say, Americans in our case, as well as remaining somewhat open to immigration? I don't know. I mean, it just seems a puzzle that it seems like part of this comes from people's identities being under siege. What can we do to deal with that when it comes to a kind of a political issue?
Well, I think people have to realize that immigrants become Americans.
Right.
We are an immigrant society. We all came from, at one point, somewhere else.
Right.
And when people realize that, go back 2, 3, 4, 5 generations, those people were immigrants in the United States, and they became Americans. They may have been Muslim Americans, or may have been Japanese Americans, may have been Jewish Americans, but they're all Americans. And it's going to take a lot of education and a lot of a lot of political goodwill to do that, which I think is we don't have too much of right now. And this is nothing new in the United States. We had this right after World War II broke out. We had the Japanese internment,
Right.
which is really not a great part of our history.
Right.
And we have economic problems right now, and we have the ban on Muslims from many countries. So all this has to be spoken about openly by our politicians.
And I mean, I take it another issue. So on the one hand, there's the threat to people's identity that's come through the feeling of being overrun. But I take it there's also just a threat to identity that comes with people feels that things have changed so much over the past couple decades. President Trump's campaign slogan was "Make America Great Again," in some sense that something has been lost, that changes to the complexion, the nature of American society have been so rapid, and that people have lost something, or at least some people feel like they've lost something that they want to recover. Is there any way in which politicians should get us to think about this issue? Is there any kind of moral leadership that we need here to think about what it means for the greatness of America? Do we need to make America great again?
I think we're going to have to become more cosmopolitan. I don't think this image of the WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, can continue. We already are the most religiously diverse country in the world. That's a fact. And we just need to realize that America is going to mean something different for our children and grandchildren than it used to be, and we can't return to the Norman Rockwell era of just the white Protestant. We've gotten way beyond that.
And that can be a source of power for us going forward.
I think so. Yeah, it's something to look forward to. We're becoming something greater than we are. In that sense, it's not that we're going to be great again. We're going to be greater because of the infusion of these different nationalities and races and religions. It's not just, we're not going to all hodgepodge into a big mixture. That's not going to happen. People will still keep their separate traditions, but it's actually interesting to learn about these other things. That's the educational part, is that when if our leaders could encourage you that, we could have a better country than we do now because of the influx. And I see that where I work. When other people from different countries come and work, it makes for a much better company.
When I go downtown Iowa City, I just love seeing people of different ethnicities, different religious backgrounds, different wearing clothing. And you go to some other smaller cities where it's sort of the same, it's all white. It's less comforting to me. I just feel better.
Right, but I take it some people feel the opposite,
People
right?
feel very opposite. They come back,
Right.
they come to Iowa City.
They come to Iowa
What
City.
the heck are we doing?
Right. But can we maintain? Okay. How about this? Maybe another way at this is to talk about what role do political leaders have here in combating hate crimes? I mean, on the one hand, we have the idea of perhaps portraying an image of how we can be stronger by embracing our diversity. But even setting that goal aside, if we just want to focus on what needs to be done when there are these hate crimes, I think that can be agreed across the political spectrum that these things are horrible things. What role does a political leader have in confronting them? What role does the president have? What role does a governor have? Senators have? Mayors have? I mean, what should our political leaders be doing in light of threats to a Muslim center or the desecration of Jewish graves or any other kind of hate crime? What should our politicians be doing that they're not doing?
Well, they should say something about it, first of all. I haven't heard one say anything about this letter in Des Moines.
For one thing that I must say that I understand, for example, the security concerns that politicians always have to answer to the Congress and to the people when election times come, but they have to make educated statements, and we can excuse people who are not politicians when they make ignorant statements or hateful statements based on uneducated decisions. But when it comes to politicians, they are required to make educated statements that differentiate between a religious group or a religion, a world religion that is established that has 1.6 billion followers, or any other religions or culture or diverse ethnic group, and between what is considered a security threat. And when I believe that it's very powerful for politicians to make educated statements. It has a huge effect on the people. And also symbolic actions such as when President Obama last year went to visit a mosque, and he spoke to the young Muslim Americans telling them that you belong here. Don't let anyone else convince you otherwise. That had a huge impact on young American Muslims, on their morale and the way they view themselves, and they, as I believe, as they grow as American Muslims. But now when you have someone trying to implement a ban on Muslims without really differentiating between the religion, the religious people, and the extreme groups, that creates for a huge confusion and misleading the public.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and so what about what role do we as citizens have in working against anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim sentiment, racism generally? I mean, the political leaders, we have to hold to some standard, but what about just us as individuals here?
Talk to our kids. Do their kids know Jewish people? They know people of the Muslim faith. They check with them, check with their neighbors. If something happens, they go over and support them.
Right. Yeah. President Trump, made that statement that he calls himself the least racist person ever. And I was wondering, is that a good or a bad starting point for confronting this issue? I mean, even at a personal level, I mean, is it, I mean, I don't know. It seemed odd to me. I thought to myself, maybe it's better to start by recognizing that perhaps one is enmeshed a little bit in some kinds of prejudices oneself.
When one of your aides is a founder of Breitbart, as a known anti-Semite and white supremacist, you have to wonder about the words that Mr. Trump speaks.
Well, I think what you're getting at is humility, which we all need more of.
Right.
And really, when you start studying the world's religions, you will find out how much exactly you do not know. So I think among citizens, it's our duty to become more religiously literate, to learn about these other things. We have plenty of educational offerings in the Interreligious Council that people can take advantage of. Hassan just taught a wonderful 4-week course on Muhammad, and I understand Islam a lot more now because of it.
Right. Well, what else can we do, Hassan, personally?
Personally, I have found it a very profound experience for me when I first went to a temple, a Jewish temple, and participated in the service. This has had a tremendous effect on me in the way that it had formed my worldview and understanding of. I already had Jewish friends, but now I understand their world even better.
Right.
And this can be scary for some people, and no one says it's an easy thing for someone to step into a religious place of worship and participate in religious, but it can start with observation, with education for young.
Yeah, I'm afraid I have to cut you off, but I think that's a wonderful thing to say, that we need to open up. I think we all play a role in creating the social environment in this country, and a little humility is a good thing. Well, I thank you for a great conversation. I hope that the issues we've begun to talk about are ones that you take seriously and continue to talk about in your own homes and communities. So thank you, and we'll see you next time on Ethical Perspectives on the News.